Welcome to this podcast. In this podcast, I'm going to be talking about Mars's placement in Virgo. What is the sign of Virgo? Now, we know that Virgo is the sixth sign of the zodiac. And so it comes after Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, and then Virgo. So that's the way that we're going to be talking about Virgo here. We're going to be talking about it in the form of a connector. Now, hear me out. Because the natal chart, really, the zodiac, is made up of 12 signs. But one of the key features of this arrangement, because the 12 signs are arranged in a circle, and a circle is 360 degrees. So one of the key features of this arrangement is that inevitably, as each sign is divided into a segment of 30 degrees, it is inevitable that you'll have some signs opposite some other signs. Okay, that's the intrinsic arrangement within a natal chart. And so these signs, as they are opposed to one another, are said to be projections of one another in that sense. So that the sign of Aries really is projected into the sign of Libra. Taurus is projected into the sign of Scorpio. Gemini is projected into the sign of Sagittarius. And what is the difference between these lower half signs and then the upper half signs? The difference is that in the lower half placement of the signs, say from Aries to Virgo, right, you're dealing with a reality as perceived as a self. Now, the signs above these placements, above these signs that they project into, you are now dealing with the self as it relates to what it considers to be an external environment. That's the difference. Self versus others. Because the true nature of self is only found in the expression of others. That's why they say that if you really want to know who you are, one good measure is not all of it, but one good measure is the way that people know who you are. So people act as a mirror in a sense. And within that mirror, you can see yourself. And so that conditions the type of relationships that you're supposed to have with people. If you end up having good relationships with people, right, if you're that sort of person, then it means that there is something agreeable about your nature, something agreeable to the rest of the world around you. Now, I'm not saying this because it's a hard and fast rule, because I totally understand the fact I've seen too many natal charts that sometimes in order to be able to bring about a specific type of reality, it is necessary to set yourself in opposition to others as an ingredient in the cooking that is your life. That's really what it is, you see. And so the sign of Virgo really is a projection into the sign of Pisces. And because this arrangement of 12 signs sitting opposite each other, it means that there are only really 6 expressions of personality archetypes. Because if Aries is a projection into Libra, then Aries and Libra form part of a unity of some kind, a dynamic, a dyadic dynamic, so to speak. Okay? Because they're describing a fundamental expression that in one side of it, it acts as Aries, but in the other side, it acts as Aries in relationship to others, and that's Libra, right? Good. So invariably, there are only 6 personality archetypes. And that brings me to the heart of what Virgo is. Virgo is the 6th personality archetype, the 6th dyadic pair, because Virgo and Pisces now occupy this dyadic relationship. Okay? So Virgo really is concerned with the crossover from what you consider to be an internal reality space into an external reality space. That's what Virgo is. That's what it's concerned about. Because Virgo represents the fundamental dilemma that Leo has. Yeah, I know. Let me explain. You see, the problem that Leo has is that Leo as a personality archetype is totally self-contained. In fact, the whole of personality evolution can stop in Leo. Why? Because Leo is a fundamental completion. It is the birth of the ego. And once the ego has come into existence, what else does it need? It can decide to isolate itself and be on its own in absolute happiness and joy. If it were alone in the universe, that is. The problem is that Leo is not alone. And that's where the problem of Leo starts. Leo is not alone. And if Leo must reach out into other egos that are like it, then it has to evolve. The problem with the evolution of Leo is that how does it leave its self-containment? How? It's too perfect. It feels so complete. So what motivates Leo to actually make the move? Because reaching out to other egos simply means that Leo would have to do what? Diminish itself. And it doesn't want to do that. I mean, who gets rid of a wonderful thing? Nobody. So that's where Virgo comes in. Virgo is the attenuation of the ego of Leo. And you can imagine that ego as an intensity of volume. Just imagine, the radio playing at high volume, high intensity, blaring its tune for everybody to hear, whether you want to or not. That's Leo. Now, if Leo is going to have good neighbors or be a good neighbor to other people, it's going to have to turn that volume down. And that's the work of Virgo. Now, turning the volume down doesn't mean that the speakers or the stereo set or the radio set cannot produce maximum volume. It can, but it chooses not to. And the only reason why it does that is because it is trying to cross over into the reality system that Libra represents. And in Libra, two egos have to come together and interact within a space. Now, if Leo goes into that space with its full volume, there'll be no space for anybody else to come into. And so relating becomes impossible. So the job of Virgo is to attenuate the intensity of Leo, to reduce it, to diminish it a bit. But it's not being forced to diminish it. Leo diminishes it because it is aware that it needs to get to Libra. It is that awareness that is the focal point of the Virgo archetype. And so what happens? Funny enough, when people meet each other for the first time, they always try to put their best foot forward. Because in Libra, people don't get to see us as we really are. They get to see us as we want them to see us. That's what it means to make good first impressions. And for those who are used to meeting people, regularly and all that, you understand the power of first impressions, because it's the first impression that is made in the young human infant at the moment that it is born. That is what becomes the ascendant, and that is the birth of Aries. Now, if you project this into Libra, it becomes the first impression you make when you meet someone. And this is very powerful. Don't underestimate it. That's why it's called the descendant. And it is opposite the ascendant for a reason. Okay? It's the externalization of your ascendant. That's what your descendant is. It's how you want people to see that ascendant. They don't get to see the real ascendant on the cusp of the 7th house. They don't, which is the descendant. They don't. They get to see what you want them to see. Okay? And that's the power of Libra. Because it is within that Libra that we get to experiment with who we are and how we relate to another type of reality. And, people assume that Libra means a relationship with another person, but that's not really what it means. It means the way that an individual, a personality, reacts or relates to any type of reality outside of the self. So when you perceive a reality to be outside of you, the way that you interact with it, it's shown in the sign of Libra, or with matters relating to the 7th house, as the case may be. You see? And to prepare for that very important point, because that Libran house is so important, because it begins a different chapter of the evolution of the signs towards Pisces. Very important chapter. And it is the task of Virgo to prepare for that chapter. And Virgo does this by, I've already talked about attenuating the ego, but that's not all it does. You see, Virgo is a functional awareness. That's right. It's a very basic functional awareness. That's why Virgo is classified as mutable earth. And what is earth? Earth has to do with tangible things. Your experience of physical reality. That's what the earth signs are. But in mutable earth, it is a physical reality that is changing. And as it is changing you. And as you are changing it. That's what it means to mutate. It's a co-evolutionary process. It's a dynamic. Right? It's a dynamic that references itself and then references something else and then references itself, etc., etc. And that way, you are able to evolve with your physical reality towards a goal. And that goal is always in Capricorn. That's really what it is. This is the way to understand astrology. If you're not reading it this way, then the outcomes or whatever it is that you're looking at, they're not complete. So this is what it really is. And so this ability or this desire, right, to implement functional awareness. And what does functional awareness mean, so as not to become too abstract or technical? It means how to do things in your everyday reality. Everyday common sense. That's the basic definition of it. Common sense. So that you are able to look at reality the way that reality is, at a very flat level, without all these funny assumptions. That's what earth means. It means that you look at reality the way that it is in front of your eyes. No assumptions. What you see is what you get. That's basic common sense. And people who tend to think on that fundamental level, they're not going to make any inspirational breakthroughs where life is concerned. They're not going to write the inspirational poetry or paint you an artwork that is truly revelatory. No. But what they're going to be very good at is managing the day-to-day experience of living. In fact, that is where they excel. The day-to-day management of common sense. And so they don't take risks that are driven by inspirational assumptions. No, they're not that kind of people. They're very down to earth. And it is this drive towards functional efficiency, right, that helps them to navigate Leo to Libra. Because the use of that functional efficiency really is about looking for the right type of connections. Connections that are driven by purpose that is laden with basic common sense. So, if you're a poor person, you're constantly looking for how to relate to people who can improve your economics. If you're someone who's not very good educationally, you are constantly looking for the commonsensical ways to navigate into a reality of people who are academics or people who are knowledgeable. You see, it's this type of trying to make these type of functional connections, real world, everyday type of connections. That's what typifies Virgo. Okay? And the idea is that the Virgo personality becomes increasingly good at this. Now, there are up and downs to this type of approach in life because you miss out on a lot. Okay? But what you don't miss out on is a type of groundedness that allows you to put your foot on the ground. And usually when there's turbulence in the environment, these are the kind of people that land on their feet because they never really strayed away from shore, so to speak. They're always close to the coast. In fact, they don't leave the coast at all. Okay? The idea is that they want to always have a seat to sit on when the music stops. That's their primary thinking. And that's the way they think. Okay? Now, so what is the purpose of this? What is the purpose of this type of thinking? It's because the Virgo personality fears one thing above all else. Inadequacy. Failure. They simply can't stand it. Being caught out at sea, up the creek without a paddle, so to speak. This is the stuff of nightmares. That kind of thinking can wake them up in the middle of the night in a puddle of sweat. Because, this idea of not having their feet on the ground as the world is shaking, this is the stuff of nightmares for them. And so, Virgo's mind really is very basic. They look at their physical environment as something that it's not laden with too much emotion. It's laden with just proper thinking and proper common sense. Oh, this is what I have to do, and that is what I have to do, and this is what I have to. Everything is driven by function. And so when you have significant placements in Virgo, right? For instance, if Virgo has to produce Venus, right? What it does is that Venus comes out with the ability to arrange things in proper order. Not generally just based on aesthetics alone or the beauty of things. No. It's further complexified by utility and the need for functional harmony. Because what Virgo originally represents is a connection. Virgo is that thing, that personality archetype that represents a connection that connects everybody together. That's how Virgo becomes Pisces. Because Pisces is when everybody is connected together into one. But Virgo represents the origin of that impulse. That's really what it is. Okay? That's really the essence of what it is. And then, commonsensical ways to live your life every day. You got to take care of yourself. You know that if you want to do well in life, you got to be alive to do well. So you focus on your health. You understand? Astrologers also often associate Virgo with routine and all that. But, these are just words. The reality of the matter is that this routine comes from this commonsensical approach. Why? Because the Virgo is so afraid of being caught out at sea. It's not for them. And so when you find a sign on the cusp of the sixth house, that house tries to force that sign to behave like Virgo. So if you're looking at a sign on the cusp of the sixth house, right, that house is basically saying, this is the way that you gotta behave where matters of this. And some signs are better able at reproducing this effect than others. Some will clearly struggle. And so when we come to the area of Mars, we talked about Mars in my Mars in Aries podcast. I talked about how Mars is an explosive force that is suddenly released within the personality. It is the assertiveness that allows matter to move. Because why? Material things have inertia. It's just the way that they are because they're material. Okay? So a thing will remain the way that it is except a force is applied to it to change its position. It will just remain where it is. Okay? That force needed to change the state of that thing. Doesn't matter what the state is. It's any type of qualitative state. So the state that changes from sad to happy, from having nothing to having plenty, from being jobless to suddenly having a lot of work. These are all change of states. And in all of these, the Martian principle or the Martian force is implicated in every one of them. So if you want to know when these things are going to happen in your reality, you need to look at where Mars is, because that's what supplies the energy, the oomph to change reality, usually as a function of will. Okay, so your Mars placement is where you exert yourself in, very forcefully, usually very impulsively and suddenly. Okay, because it's that suddenness that forces a transformation. There are other things in reality that transform things, but they do so very slowly, and oftentimes you won't even know that they are in effect. Now, what they lack in suddenness, they make up for in what? Sustenance. They're able to sustain change over a very long period of time. Mars is changing now. It means things will change now. It's a suddenness that happens, and before you know what's happening, the impulse is gone. Okay? Now, so what happens? What does it look like when that impulse is placed in Virgo? Because we've talked about what Virgo is. Virgo is a very commonsensical thing. It's something that is very grounded. It's something that looks at reality without risks. It doesn't want to take any risks. It is always trying to perfect itself because it's always looking for ways, right, to increase the functional brilliance that it internally possesses. It is in Virgo that you find functional intelligence. And what is functional intelligence? It's the everyday management and structure of a reality, human reality. Okay? And that's why some people think Virgos are very hard workers and all that. Well, it's not about hard work. That's the way they understand reality when they have significant placements in Virgo. They're not doing it because of you. They're doing it because that is the way that they need access into something else that represents Libra for them. So Virgo always has purpose. All its connectors have purpose, and the purpose is always discovered in Libra. That's why people who have very bad relationships, they think that the problem is in Libra or in the 7th house. It's not. The problem always starts in Virgo in the 6th house. Alright? Because that's where you have the filters. Because it is in Virgo that you're making decisions for your own good. You're filtering off a lot of things. And so when you have so many placements in Virgo or in the 6th house, those act as filters for your relationshiping. That's really what it is. Okay? That's how these things are structured. So when you have Mars in Virgo, it acts the same way. It's a filter. So that the force of application, right, comes in the form of these functionalities that this person pursues. That's how they compete. They fight by being functionally brilliant. So these are the people who, in the office space, for instance, they play the office politics better than anyone else. Because they're good at their job and they know how to maintain that precise relationship that the boss needs to get them to where they want to go. And they're very diligent at this. They work quietly and studiously towards this. And they won't put a step wrong. That's the problem. They're very annoying in that sense, alright? They just won't put a step wrong. It's almost like they have this mind that computes basic steps of reality. I wouldn't say it's strategy per se, alright? Because there really isn't any grand plan beyond making sure that they're on the good books of the person above them and they have good relationships with the people below them. Because that's what the connection is. It's the 6th sign. So it connects. Okay? And that's what 6 does. It connects everything together. All right? So this is what it is. So Mars in Virgo is the ability to energize this process. When Mars finds itself in Virgo, then these functional connectors, which Virgo put out into the world, seeking for a reality space that represents Libra, where interaction between these connectors can take place, that is, with another reality or with another person. This approach is carried on with extreme vigor and energy, so that the Mars in Virgo personality actively seeks these connectors and these relationships. They actively want to make those relationships. And I told you that Mars is the energy of sex. So the Mars in Virgo personality pursues sex with people that they believe can be beneficial to them. That's the important part of it. And some people might find this a contradiction of terms, because Virgo is the virgin, and you would think that because of that they represent this attitude, a kind of puritanical attitude towards sex, but that's not true. They're extremely sexual beings. It's just that the way that they understand reality is very different from, the rest of everybody else. They tend to process reality at a functional level, almost like at a calculative level, but it's not calculation like you have in Scorpio with a motive. No, it's a processing of reality on a day-to-day basis that constantly just weighs what makes sense and what doesn't. That is what people describe as the analytical nature of Virgo. And so when you add this analytical nature of Virgo to the Martian function, then it's just common sense to sleep with someone who can give them what they want. Yep, that's just simply what it is. The Venus in Virgo is attracted to someone who can give them what they want, or who can take them to where they want to go. They don't see anything wrong or implied by this. Why should they? That's the way that they're built. That's the way their mind works. That's how they understand the reality that they're participating in. You can't give what you don't have. You can't make someone be something else that they're not. Everyone is the way that they are, because that is what is responsible or needed in the type of reality structure that they are creating. That's really what it is. The Mars in Virgo person also displays a penchant for extreme cleanliness. It's not cleanliness per se. It's the fact that they seek perfection energetically. They have this idea of a functional perfection, which they seek because that is what motivates them. It is what allows them to assert themselves. That's the Mars that it's in Virgo. Now, this preoccupation with cleanliness is because filth of any kind represents disorderliness to them. And when this is taken to the extreme, the person becomes a hypochondriac. Alright? Unable to physically interact with other people because of fear of germs. But usually there are accentuators in the natal chart that cause this blow up. It's not normal. Okay, it's not the normal expression of Mars in Virgo. But there are certain configurations that create an anxiety with nowhere to go. And then it now shows up as this type of behavior towards dirt or filth or whatever. Okay? But they have this penchant. And that's why most of them, Mars in Virgo, some of them gravitate towards the health areas, of life. They tend to become doctors and nurses. It comes naturally to them in that respect. And even those who are not doctors and nurses, they have a remarkable instinct for how to maintain health. And the reason for this is because of their natural state of mind, the way that they think, the way that they process reality. And this is very important. This is the point I've been making all through the podcast, that Virgo is a very specific way to process reality that connects two different worlds together. It reconciles them together. So you can call Virgo the reconciliator. It reconnects realities together if they are broken. So what you have here is your perfect matchmaker of some kind, always trying to bring two things together. Some people think that this is done in Libra, and that because the symbol of Libra represents the scales, that means that's where matchmaking takes place. Libra is the theater where this happens, but the functional intelligence behind that is done in Virgo. Okay? That's really what it is. Mars in Virgo also acts as a filter. And part of what it does is it selects for the Martian attribute in the relationships that it draws into its reality. And so if you have Mars in Virgo, you have a tendency to draw people who carry significant Martian placements, either in Aries or placements conjunct the Mars functional light. That's usually how these things go. So functional lights that find themselves in Virgo act as filters or selectors. They tend to select for what they have. Now, this is not a hard and fast rule, because if the placement itself, for instance, Mars in this case, if that placement has certain types of aspects that can reverse the filter, so that instead of selecting for the Martian attribute, it repels them from the reality. It depends on this overall synthesis and the role that the Mars placement in itself is playing within the context of the natal chart. And this is very important. This is why I always insist on synthesis if you want a realistic understanding into your natal chart. Nothing else simply would do. So these people, when it comes to their health, you see the Mars, they have regular workout schedules for their body. They prioritize health because they want to be alive to enjoy the result of their hard work. The way that they reason, I need you to understand the way, very basic way that they reason. What is the point of working hard? What is the point of putting all this and persevering and making all this patient, relationshiping and all that, if eventually when you get the prize, you are too sick to enjoy the prize? They want to enjoy life. And they realize that in order to be able to do this, I need to be able to put my head down and focus. And so they're very good at organizing their realities. And that's antithetical to what Mars wants to do. Mars wants to explode. It wants to tell everybody above and below to shut the hell up. But in Virgo, it can't really. Now, this is not definitive because it depends on everything else in the natal chart. Because sometimes it is necessary for Mars in Virgo to do exactly what I've just said that it can't do. To be explosive. None of these individual placements are hard and fast like that. They need always to be placed within the context of synthesis. That's why I say, look, if you're listening to my podcast, don't just take what I'm saying and say, hey, look, that sounds right. That sounds like me. No. You must have yourself a natal chart synthesis. Otherwise, you don't know what your natal chart is saying. Synthesis is a very, very different way of looking at your natal chart. It's not the same thing as analysis. It's not the same thing as reading placements and combining them together. It's a non-commutative process, meaning not only does it require that you bring things together in the way they're placed in the natal chart, but the order in which you bring them together is important. That's why natal chart synthesis, one of the things that I teach in my classes, is how to generate the story. It's a sequential time run. You generate the story, and as you are generating the story, things are coming in the right sequence that they're supposed to come in, because that is the story. Because the mind of a human being, the psychodynamics of a human being is a narrative. That's really what it is. So that the software that runs a human being's self-awareness and their personality and all the behavioral responses, it is a narrative. That narrative, the original narrative, the core of the narrative is what you call a self. It is the I. Right? But built around it, exactly like a solar system is built, are narratives that revolve around the core narrative. These are the stories that you're telling yourself. And the aim of all of that is that you're using the power of God to bring forth a reality. That's really what it is. And the details of all of this, that's what I teach in my classes. So if you really, really want to know, there's some people who they have to know. And I welcome those people to my classes every day. Okay? They have to know. It's just something that they have to do. It's a burning need because it forms part of their programming, their own individual programming. Okay? Now, if you don't feel compelled to do so, there's no need, because the classes, they require a significant amount of interest. You must really want to know exactly what is going on. What is reality? How is it structured? What are these outcomes? Why is it that some people are able to go this way and some other people are able to go this way? Some people never even get off the ground, no matter how much they try. What's going on? You want to know? Come join my classes. Now, you won't find the answers to everything of maybe, what happened yesterday and today. No. What you're going to find is you're going to find out how these things I'm describing, how they help create a reality. That's really what it is. Now, what happens when the Mars in Virgo, when things begin to go wrong? Just like Mars in Virgo can be functionally brilliant because they have the energy to execute functional tactics. They have the ability to implement them and sustain that implementation, right? When things begin to go wrong, then this brilliance turns into criticism. Because remember, the brilliance is driven by the need to perfect relationships, to perfect these connections, because that's what the sixth sign does. It is the link between the upper half of the natal chart and the lower half of the natal chart. And its job really is to prepare for this transition. Okay? And the transition really means being able to expand your reality, your sense of reality, such that it encompasses what you consider to be others. But there are really no others. They're just extensions of yourself. And so the job of the sixth sign, and the sixthness, if you've been listening to my podcast, you'll understand that I have a particular attachment to this number. The aim is to connect different realities into one. And that is achieved in Pisces. But it starts off as an individual unit like that, to prepare the ego to be able to accommodate others, so that something else begins to grow. That's really what it is. This is one of the most powerful things you can imagine, because part of the problems that we have as human beings today is that we have horrible relationships with each other. The existence of something like racism is the report card that we have failed in the implementation or the understanding of the nature of this connection. 6. Failed. Okay? Because the whole aim of that connection is that Virgo's brilliance means that the transition from internal reality to external reality is perceived as seamless. So that the more functional brilliance that Virgo has, the seamless this transition is. So that when it's done correctly, you perceive your external reality as you. And you can imagine what that does to your relationships. That's the highest implementation of love you can imagine. So the Mars in Virgo really is capable, even the Venus in Virgo, they're capable of an extreme level of very practical love. If you really want help in your everyday reality and you want somebody who can just grind it out with you on a daily basis, day after day after day for a very long time, get yourself a Mars in Virgo or a Venus in Virgo, and they will just stick by you because that's what they do, right? Now, when they begin to get frustrated because they're only human and they do, then everything begins to come out as what? Criticisms. Because they are also criticizing themselves. But the part that you hear is the projection of that criticism of themselves towards others. Because now they begin to find fault in everything. And listen, when this process begins in the person with significant Virgo placements, you have better chance of putting a bullet in your head. Because that's what each criticism will feel like. It will be so direct, so to the heart of the matter, that you're going to want to throw yourself off a cliff. I'm exaggerating, of course, but that's what it feels like sometimes. And they don't stop until the irritation that is causing this is removed. They just go on about it. They criticize everything. And it's not the usual nagging. No, it's criticism that keeps hitting the spot in ways that are extremely irritating. Because you don't want to hear them. Alright? But the mistake people make is to just say, oh, it's just too annoying. No, they're criticizing themselves that way. Always, even when things have not begun to go wrong, they have this internal voice that is constantly criticizing. Because the drive towards functional brilliance and functional perfection is too powerful within them. Because of what the type of energy, personality signature that they're carrying. Alright? And because Virgo really is the attenuation of the ego, right? That criticism is what keeps the ego in check. That's how the volume is turned down within these people. So that you look at the Virgo personality, they have all the ego there, but the ego is constrained. Deliberately, no one's forcing them to do this. They have made that trade-off at a very early age because they aspire to something more. A connection with others. They value that more than anything because they see that as a vehicle for moving from one stage of their life to another. It's a tactical decision. The fallout of that is that the ego is always fragile. So that when you begin to criticize them the way that they can start criticizing you, they fall apart. They do. Because they're already destroying themselves inside with that little voice. Alright? So go easy on them. Now, loving someone like this, like I've said, is if your life involves a very practical, hands-on, grounded slog towards the finish line, these are the type of people that you want beside you. Outside of the usual whatever, if you don't push them too far, if the situation doesn't squeeze them beyond what is tolerable as a human, then, you wouldn't really get this. They won't turn into that critic demon or demoness. But otherwise, you're fine. Since they measure their reality by the organization within it, because that's the functional brilliance there, the functional awareness, everything needs to be organized. And it's one of the easiest things to spot about people who have significant placements in Virgo. Everything needs to be organized. So they're constantly tidying up the world, tidying up their realities. And so when things begin to fall apart, they get down to the business of tidying things back up. It doesn't matter what it is. They have the energy for that. That's what Mars is in Virgo. Now, when the untidiness grows beyond their ability to maintain this organization, then they begin to strain. But they don't complain. Not yet. They begin to complain when they cannot see how to maintain the organization anymore. When everything feels broken. Then they begin to break down. And that's when the critic monster comes out. And boy, oh boy, you better run. One of the easiest places where this begins to happen is in the area of finances. If they're stretched beyond, remember I told you they always like to stay close to shore. Maybe even onshore, they can wave at you in the middle of the sea. That's fine. But don't drag them out there. Because once they feel like they're sinking, you're going to get it. That's the way these things work.